Hello, this is Brad. Some of you know me for Sangha Stewart from Palmitas de Paz in Vista, California. And I've been asked by a couple people to do this brief recording about an experience I've had about my understanding of mindfulness practice. So I hope you enjoy it. And to begin, I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you. Hope you could see that now. And it says, empty of what? And this little talk is about my understanding of how I work with the idea of emptiness as taught by Thich Nhat Hanh. Thai was very specific in that emptiness is not nihilism, it's not nothingness. Emptiness is different. It was taught by Thai in a number of ways, and one way was through his recent reinterpretation of the Heart Sutra, to remind us that the emptiness that we're seeking is not the emptiness of no existence, but it's the emptiness of an independent self-existence. And it's the emptiness of the belief of permanence. So what I've done with this PowerPoint presentation is kind of show a little bit of the history of my understanding of what mindfulness practice means, and showing you where I've tripped up and where I feel like I'm a little bit more on my own path. It's not intended to tell you how to do things or what you should believe. It really is intended just to share my story, and if any part of it is helpful to you, that makes me happy. So to begin, I always start with the land acknowledgement, recognizing the deep roots of my ancestors, the protectors of the land, and to remind myself that I'm born of this world. I'm part of this world. The world and I are one. It reminds me that we are the land, and the land is us. The land where we stand is stolen from the people. The land is stolen from the area I live and practice in, from the Luiseño Nation and Kumeyaay Nation here in San Diego County. And to care for the land and to care for us, we shall not forget that the land is not owned by anyone. The land's caretakers were violently thrown off and killed due to greed and lack of understanding. And we'll do everything that we can with mindfulness and love in our hearts to water the seeds of interbeing as we embody practices that heal the land, that heal ourselves, and that honor the caretakers. So on this idea of nothingness, I think a couple people have weighed in on this idea of, that we don't exist, we don't have a body, or our body is only some kind of fantasy. It was the Dalai Lama who said that if you don't think you have a body, try to sleep in a room with a mosquito. You'll know in the morning that you have a body. But I think it's our perception of our body, it's a perception of our world that we really need to look at. So let's start with this. Is you can imagine this being everyone, every person, just being. When we were born, we just are. When we're born, if we're hungry, we eat. If we have to poop, we poop. If we're happy, we laugh, and if we're sad, we cry. But we're taught throughout our life that that's not how we should live our life. That we're a separate entity that needs to take care of itself, particularly here in the West, particularly in the United States. We're taught that we're an independent self, and we need to care for that self and put ourselves number one, pull ourselves up by the bootstrap, that we will realize our dreams when we do what's right for ourselves. So here in the United States, we begin to build this filter, this lens. And it's fed by the things that we're taught by our parents and our grandparents, things we see on TV, the things we're taught in school. I remember when I was going through teacher training, and it was one of the last classes I was taking, they said, remember, the real purpose of teaching is to socialize people. I was being trained as a science teacher, and I thought I was there to teach about science, but my more important mission was to socialize people, to think the way our society wants us to think, to see things in a way that our society wants us to see. So we build up this lens. It's reinforced by the books we read. It really was seeded by our DNA, because I truly believe we carry forward this lens from generation to generation. The way my grandparents saw the world wasn't just what they taught me with their words or actions. It was in the genetics they gave me. And it's also in the history of my teachers, spiritual, non-spiritual, peers, coaches, all are helping me build this lens about how to survive in the world, how to fit in, how to be acceptable and accepted. And I realized for myself that this lens for my 66 years just has gotten deeper and stronger every day. It's in the language I speak. My language has words like bad and good. My language has words like male and female. My language really lacks the creativity, at least for now, to deal with all the gray area. And so my lens is built by that language. I'm not saying I'm not responsible for that lens. I help feed it because I want to be accepted. And I think the way I get accepted is by fitting in. So if you see the lens there, what happens is the world starts coming toward us. Now the world, my graphic is not perfect because the world not only is what's coming from the outside, but the world is what's not in our brain. So the world is also what's in our body. So what's going on in our body passes through the same lens. So that when I look at my hand, I don't just see a hand, I have all the judgments about that hand, whether it's a good hand or a bad hand or a wrinkled hand or a fat hand or a small hand or a big hand. When I look at my nose, it's not just a nose. It's too big, it's too small, too many pimples, too many freckles. So rather than directly experiencing life, it all goes through this lens. And what happened for me is that instead of experiencing life as it is, I sensed life as it fit through my lens, with judgments, with all kinds of history, all kinds of trauma attached. So even as I've gotten older, I very rarely get to experience life as it truly is. For those of you of my age and around my age, you might have heard of peak experiences, and I think peak experiences are when we experience life without that lens. But most of us, I believe, are like me, don't directly experience life. We experience life distorted and contorted through our lens. So what I used to believe mindfulness was focusing in on eliminating these thoughts. I thought when I was told to let go of my monkey mind, it was to quiet these judgments, to quiet these feelings and traumatic experiences that color our life. So I would practice and I'd focus, and if you could notice on Zoom, I'm not sure, these get lighter. And that was my intention, that they would get lighter. There'd be less judgment. There'd be more experiencing of life and less judgment. And after 20 years, I discovered that wasn't true. I realized the more I fought against those thoughts, the stronger they became. The more I decided that I wasn't good enough to sit on a cushion and let go, I was just reinforcing that lens that I was talking about. And I got a little bit of reality coming in, but not much. I was so focused in on what was going on behind this lens that I've created, spending energy on letting it go, trying to figure out, trying to think through letting these things go. I was actually feeding my lens. I was adding more material to that lens about, rather than simply experiencing, I was processing. So here's where I've kind of evolved my practice to. And please take what works for you. Same thing's going on. Outside experience, passing through the lens, becoming these colored perceptions. But instead of focusing in on these perceptions, I've started focusing in on this lens that I've created. I brought my mindfulness to this lens. Not to destroy it, not to grind it down, not to get rid of it, but to see that it's there. And to see why it's there. And that why is going to be different for all of us, and that it's there is different for all of us. But for me, part of it is, it's how I deal with life. It's how I deal with the emotions I have. When I do accept life unfiltered, I feel overwhelmed sometimes. Or I'm afraid I'll feel overwhelmed sometimes. So that lens has been like this outer armor that's protected me from losing control. It's protected me and protected my belief system that allows me to believe I'm an independent self. That lens allows me to believe there's permanence. Because when we take away independent self, take away permanence, life becomes a lot squishier, a lot more fluid. So I focused in on the lens. And so as I focus in on the lens, it starts to diminish. And as it starts to diminish, for me, I've noticed these perceptions, these judgments have started to diminish too. And as I've continued and continued, I'm beginning to start to experience life sometimes without that lens I've created. And I begin to understand that this is not an easy path, because that lens is built up with every TV show I watch and every newscast I watch. And almost every interaction I have with people, I feel that lens wanting to just get stronger and stronger. But I know that the dance of mindfulness for me is to interact with the world. This is, of course, engaged Buddhism, to be engaged with the world. But to take the time to attend to that lens I built, to take the time to recognize it's not my fault. That's part of the lens talking, my fault. It's not anyone's fault that that lens gets stronger. And to simply experience life as it is. And what I'm finding is naturally, I feel life is a lot more flexible, a lot less independent self, a lot less permanent. So I'm not focusing in on those outcomes. What I'm focusing in on is what's getting in the way of those outcomes being there for me. Focusing in every day, every opportunity I have to thin the lens. And that's what mindfulness does for me. It thins the lens for me. So I wrote a little poem this morning. I'd shared this last night, and I'd like to share a poem that arose for me. Let me take a moment to find it. There it is. So I use the word poem very loosely. There's my lens talking, trying to protect me. But here's what came to me this morning. I wander about the fetid swamps of my unprocessed memories and traumas. I recognize that in my slumber, I fashioned an adobe robot from the mud that serves as my protector from reality. Let me say that again. I recognize that in my slumber, I have fashioned an adobe robot. I like that term. It just popped in, an adobe robot. I'm slowly beginning to awaken to the fact that my adobe doppelganger prevents me from experiencing the terrible beauty of life. I begin to recognize that I must water the adobe with tears I refuse to shed in the past, because once moistened, I can allow the mud to give birth to the lotus I've been denying. So I know it always takes away the power of a poem to explain it, but I do want to recognize Thay's great teaching, Thich Nhat Hanh's great teaching about a lotus needs mud in order to bloom. But what I've done is I've dried out that mud by refusing to cry my tears. So now part of my practice is letting those tears flow to allow the mud to moisten so that my, and hopefully your, lotus can appear. I hope this was helpful for you. Be well.